Good morning, everyone. If you can turn, please, to page 20 of your macroeconomic workbooklet. So that's the Year 12 Macroeconomics, Section 3. In the last virtual lesson, we looked at economic growth. We haven't completely finished that section yet because there's a number of diagrams that I wanted to teach you whenever you're actually in person in lessons. So I haven't ignored those. I'm just simply jumping to employment and unemployment because there's some things here that you can work on independently on your own. For the purpose of this session, we'll be working from page 20 onwards. And again, the same concept applies. I will give you opportunities to pause the video as we go through, and you can access the QR codes and complete some of the tasks in your work booklet. So employment and unemployment is something that you'll make reference to throughout year 1 and year 2 for macro economics. Unemployment in particular is something that we also look at in microeconomics in year 2 when we look at labour markets. So there's one diagram that we look at real labour market wages that we will also look in the year 2 syllabus as well. What we're going to look at for this lesson is we're going to look at the main UK measures for unemployment, and that would be the claimant count and the labour force survey measure. We're also going to look at the concepts of voluntary and involuntary unemployment and seasonal, frictional, structural, and cyclical unemployment as well. Now, on page 20 of your work booklet, on the second slide, I would like you to pause the video now, and I would like you to find out a number of things. First of all, I want you to find out what is the current rate of employment and unemployment in the UK. And I want you to briefly jot down some of the current issues that are facing unemployment. So once you find out the figure for unemployment, try and give at least 3 reasons why there is currently unemployment in the UK. When I see you in lessons face-to-face, we will make this the first discussion point of our lessons. So if you wanted to pause the video now and spend 5 or 10 minutes searching on the current unemployment and employment figures and the reason for those levels of employment and unemployment in the UK. Now, once you've done that, again, you've got a QR code on the top right-hand corner. What is employment and unemployment? This is simply just some definitions. So if you can access, please, the QR code on the right-hand side of page 21, and again, spend 5 or so minutes just working out the meaning of each of these and writing them into your work booklet. Okay, so on page 22, again, pause the video, access the QR code, and you're looking for information on the following: the labour force survey, the unemployment rate, and the claimant count. So accessing the YouTube video, write down your understanding of the meaning of each of those 3 terms, please. So some notes then from the video. A bit like what we talked about with measuring economic growth. Just as with economic growth, we also measure the rate of employment and unemployment, but those measures should be looked at with a degree of caution. Okay, we want to examine the accuracy of that unemployment data. So first of all, the labour force survey, the LFS, is intended to be representative of the entire population of the UK, but there is always scope for sample error. But sample size is normally very high. So we have a labour force survey. It is almost near on impossible to catch everyone. However, that we would say in its broadest terms, on the whole, it is a representative of the entire population. Measured unemployment excludes the economically inactive, often complex reasons for people not searching for work. So there may be some individuals who are at the age that they could be in full-time employment. They are physically fit to be in full-time employment, but they are not necessarily engaged in paid work, and therefore they would be considered unemployed in the UK. However, there are complex reasons for why some people may not work. So, for example, people could be carers for an elderly relative, for example. Some people can be carers for their children, depending upon the complex needs of their children. There are some cases when individuals, even though they may like to work, may face complex reasons as to why they cannot work. Unemployment is not the same as underemployment, i.e. people working part-time, but who would prefer to work full-time jobs. So let's say, for example, you were working a part-time job, but you ideally would like a full-time job. Statistically, in the UK, you would be considered employed, even though you're only working part of an employment contract. So, for example, if you only worked 2 days in the working week, say you work Monday, Tuesday, and you the rest of the week off, statistically, in the government's eyes, you are considered employed because you're engaged in work, not necessarily full-time work. But that unemployment figure doesn't consider the number of people who could work a full-time job. In all countries, there is disguised hidden unemployment, with many people working in informal labour markets. Now, this often links with, you can jot this down in your notes, similar to that of black markets or shadow markets. If you think about in microeconomics, we look at black markets or shadow markets. These are illegal markets, markets that are unknown to the government, and therefore the government cannot regulate these markets. We cannot confirm that these markets are giving the consumers the right possible standards. We cannot confirm that consumers are not being exploited in this industry. If consumers are buying a product in a black or shadow market, it is likely that there are people working within that market. There are a number of people also that, for example, they claim benefits, but also work on the sly, so to speak. They take cash in hand, and that money in effect isn't, on paper they're considered somebody who's unemployed, when in actual fact they're working in a hidden market. So interesting to note here at 2020, UK unemployment rate is roughly about 3.5%. June 2022 to August 2022, percentage of economically active people aged over 16 who are unemployed. So unemployment hit its lowest at 3.5%, and you can see that unemployment rose at sort of the beginning of 2020, obviously because COVID kicked in. But after the COVID lockdowns, unemployment has been brought down again. Now, interesting, as economists, we always like to see sources of comparison. And what we can see here is that the unemployment rate is very low at 3.5% since the 1970s. You can look at it, was reaching quite high around the mid 1980s. But whilst in 2020 it is at its lowest, you can see that from the early millennium to 2020, the number of people on long-term sick is at a record high. Now, that could potentially be brought about by COVID, for example, a number of people on long COVID, but a number of people probably a bit more less immune to some of the health concerns that we see in the UK. Turning then in your work booklets to page 23. Can you copy in, please? Just pause the video for a second and copy in the definitions of voluntary and involuntary unemployment. So voluntary unemployment, where workers could find work at the market wage rate, but choose not to accept employment. Now, this is where you get issues where the government basically say there are jobs available, and we do see that currently in the labour market. There is currently vacancies that go unfilled, and it's because of voluntary unemployment. People are saying, I could do that job, I would have the skills to do that job, but the wage rate isn't high enough. So their decision not to work is influenced by the market wage rate simply being too low. Can you think what might cause this, and which group of economists might believe in this? Normally, we would say classical economists. Involuntary unemployment, when workers cannot find employment at the market wage rate. So involuntary unemployment simply is that they're willing to work at that wage rate, but there is no jobs available for them at that wage rate. Again, if you can jot this in, this is just further what you see in blue. The causes of voluntary unemployment would be generous state benefits. So we get into that tricky situation where you can only attract people into jobs if the wage rate is higher than the rate of state benefit. And where you see situations, and again, you can jot this in, where you see situations where the benefits is higher than the wage rate, that's basically government failure. The government has introduced a benefit system that makes not working look like the more attractive offer. When ideally you want potentially economically active people engaged in full-time work. So voluntary unemployment can be higher if there's generous state benefits, if there's high levels of income tax. So the high levels of income tax acts as a disincentive for people to want to supply their labor. They would rather claim benefits than work and have to pay high rates of income tax. The belief that the market wage rate is simply too low, disincentive to work. There are some people that basically say, yeah, why would I do that? That the wage rate is not high enough for me to be attracted to want to go out and work. The belief of the classical economists. Involuntary unemployment, there could be potentially, when workers cannot find employment at the market wage rate, it could be a lack of AD in the economy, a lack of aggregate demand, too few jobs, workers prepared to work but cannot find jobs. You will find in economics that labour is derived demand. The demand for labour is derived from the demand of a good or service in which labour produces. If the demand for the good falls, the demand for labour to produce that good will also fall. So you could argue that whenever there's a fall in aggregate demand, i.e. a fall in consumption, which is a component of aggregate demand, if consumption falls, then therefore there will be a fall in the demand for labour. This is the belief of the Keynesian economists, whereas classical economists believe that in the long run, everybody who wants a job at the market wage rate will find one. So in economics, we have different types of unemployment. You've got frictional, structural, seasonal, and cyclical or demand deficient or Keynesian unemployment. Again, you know what to do at this stage. Access the QR code, pause the video, and I want you to write in, read the attached article, and you need, for each one of the types of unemployment, you need to write in the definition, you need to give an example, you need to look at causes, and you need to look at possible solutions to that type of unemployment. So if you want to pause the video now and spend 10 to 15 minutes accessing those, please. Okay, once you've done that, then on to page 25 of your work booklet. And we're looking now at what type of unemployment in these examples. So have a read through these. So have a pause, have a read through, take about a few minutes. Once you're ready, then restart or play the video again, and I will go through the answers. So, workers made redundant from a steel plant due to a downturn in construction. And that'll be cyclical unemployment, where we have a situation where the individual is, through no fault of their own, the construction industry falls, labour being derived demand, the demand for steel falls, therefore the demand for steel workers will also fall as well. A graduate who spent 6 months searching for work after leaving university. I would argue that we've all had a situation of frictional unemployment. I remember whenever I graduated as a teacher, I finished teacher training in about, I think it was May time, but I didn't start working at Beth's as a newly qualified teacher until September of that year. So I went through end of May, June, July, August, 3 months. In effect, I had a job secured. I secured my post at Beth's in March of that year. I finished teacher training in May, but in effect, because of the working start dates for teachers, I didn't start until September, but I knew I had a job to go to in September. But I went 3 months, in effect, unemployed, and I do remember 3 months unpaid as well. You often get that whenever you finish your education and you're waiting or searching for work if you haven't got it before you leave. Or sometimes people will leave work. Let's say, for example, you're made redundant and you're looking to get another job. That's a period of time in which you don't have a job. A mother actively searching for work but unable to accept a job because of a high cost of childcare. That would be structural. An unemployed farmer finds it difficult to find new work in high-tech sectors. Again, would be structural. The structure of the economy is moving. It's difficult for the skill set of a farmer to be used in high-tech sectors. People working in aircraft, you take, for example, Businesses lose their job because of a contract in the volume of global trade, cyclicals, so changes in the economic cycle. Some jobs on a manufacturing production line are replaced by robots. And again, that would be structural. So real wage unemployment. If you can write these in, please. So this is page 29. Nope, sorry. Page 25, please. So the definition of real wage unemployment is the effect of a sustained increase in real wages above the free market equilibrium wage rate, also sometimes called classical unemployment. Analyze this by looking at micro demand and supply diagram for the labour market. Need to label diagrams accurately. Remember, labour is demanded by firms and supplied by households. So firms will demand labour to produce the goods and services in which consumers are demanding. Households, and remember I've said before, you and I, we belong to a household. We supply our labour. I currently supply my labour to the school to teach you economics. So a real wage unemployment diagram. First of all, I want you to work your way through this with me. So on the y-axis, we've got real wage rates. And if you label that in now, please, the real wage rate is the price for labor. Okay, so a wage rate is the price for labor. It's what we are attracted to when we supply our labor. And on the x-axis, then we've got the quantity of labor or employment, often measured through hours of work that we're willing to work. If you can draw then an upward sloping supply of labour curve and a downward sloping demand for labour curve, often we abbreviate them as SL for supply of labour and DL for demand for labour. Then go ahead and again, if you can write this in and do your dashed lines, find then your equilibrium wage rate. So you've got wage rate and the quantity of labour equilibrium. Okay, so wage equilibrium, quantity of labour equilibrium, the market equilibrium. What will happen if trade unions think that the market wage rate is simply too low? Show and explain this on your diagram. Well, what we would have here is basically that's the free market labour wage rate. Okay, so it's set at WE and QLE. That's the wage rate that's set by the free labour market forces, without any intervention from the government and any intervention from a trade union. If trade unions get involved, they use the power of what's called collective bargaining to set a wage rate that is set above the equilibrium wage rate. So what you find happening here, a wage rate is set above W1, and automatically you can see that it puts the market into disequilibrium or labour market disequilibrium, in which we've got a situation of excess supply of labour. So the excess supply of labour goes up to QLS, and then the demand for labour falls to QLD. Now, this is because if you look at the original equilibrium, and we'll go through this more when I see you face-to-face in lessons, but as you move up, as the wage rate increases, you then have a contraction along the demand curve. So firms who demand labour decrease their demand for labour. On the flip side of that, you've got an extension in the supply of labour. Individual households are now more incentivized to supply their labour, so more people are willing and able to work for the higher wage, but firms' cost of production will rise if they have to pay a higher wage rate. So you've got this disequilibrium, and you've got a situation in which you've got excess supply of labour. Okay. On page 27, then, if you can read pages 36 and 37, and then if you can summarize on the three following aspects of wage stickiness, activities of trade unions, and the minimum wages. Okay, once you do that, that should finish your lesson for today.